I woke up and saw that my grandmother was fast asleep. I could hear soft voices chit-chatting in the living room. Our relatives were still here. I looked at my phone, 11 p.m. on the dot. I got up and went to the bathroom. As I walked by the living room, I noticed a few aunties in the dining room and a few uncles chatting in the living room. I turned on the bathroom light, closed the door, sat down, and did my business. Not even 1 minute went by, and suddenly I heard. The noises were eerie and sent chills down my spine. I felt anxious, and even being alone in the bathroom felt uncomfortable. The voices grew louder and the cries sounded like mourning or lushunia for a deceased person. At first, I thought they were watching some kind of Hmong funerals on television. I quickly finished my business and I opened the door to an empty living room. The room felt cold and it was dark and emptied. The TV was off. I went to the dining room and saw no one. Maybe everyone had left while I was in the bathroom. I went back to my grandma's bedroom and went back to sleep. Not long after I returned to bed, I woke up to someone attempting to crawl in beside me. My back was against the wall and I faced my grandma. The person crawled from the foot of the bed and I could feel the pressure of their body on the mattress. I tried to open my eyes to see who it was, but my eyelids felt incredibly heavy. My body seemed weak, as if all the nerves weren't functioning properly. Suddenly, the sound of the shoqing shunya grew loud again. And then, the person between my grandma and me began to nya into my ear. I woke up to my Aunt Sheng's voice.
Pajkub, Pajkub, Shaloko Haiko.
I opened my eyes. It was still broad daylight. Everything was just a dream. My grandma is by my side, fast asleep. My grandma was diagnosed with stomach cancer in June 2023, and the doctors gave her 1 year or less to live. In December, she stopped chemotherapy because her body had become too weak to handle the treatments. Her oncologist warned her that without chemo, she would have less than 6 months to live. My grandma accepted her fate and transitioned to hospice care. Since then, she's had both good and bad days. But gradually, her strength declined and she stopped eating. The hospice nurse visited daily to assess her condition, but her pain only increased, and eventually the pain medications no longer provided relief. Aunt Sheng and my uncle's wife, Aunt Dee, became my grandma's main caretakers. I am only here to visit my grandma, and I tried to provide relief for her caretakers as much as I could. Aunt Sheng stood by the side of the bed. Her face looked tired and drained. She hasn't slept in days. Exhausted, Aunt Sheng whispered to me,
Có bữa nói chè có gió này tài ó, cú sẽ xá lìa cú ở một bữa tỏ sọ phải blia. Giờ mua đã chi này chè có lọ trà của nó.
I nodded. I retrieved my phone from beneath my pillow and began scrolling through Facebook. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed my grandmother's eyes opened, her gaze fixed on me. I dismissed it as a trick of the light until I turned to look directly at her, and her eyes promptly closed. She appeared fast asleep, but an unsettling feeling washed over me. It was as if there was another presence in the room, one I couldn't see. Despite my unease, I continued scrolling through my phone, only to experience the same sensation again. This time, I couldn't focus on the scream. Relatives will start to arrive soon, so I decided to get up to help make rice and dinner. Families have been gathering here at my uncle's house to show their support ever since my grandmother's illness gotten worse. My grandma is very lucky to be surrounded by people who care about her during her worst. Aunt Sheng heard me and decided to join me in the kitchen. Eventually, people started to arrive. They usually stay with us until 11 p.m. or midnight. While no one can take away the pain from my grandma's cancer, their presence and support meant a lot. Their comfort has been invaluable to our family during these difficult times. After dinner, I joined the women in my grandma's room. She was awake but tired and exhausted from the pain. I sat in the chair by her head and asked if she wanted some water. She nodded, and I assisted her in drinking from the cup of warm water and straw on her nightstand. My grandma hasn't been the same since her diagnosis. She can't engage in full conversations anymore. As I sat there, feeling helpless, my grandma said,
Pajkub, Java, Jatote, Jitube Chaka Laloboa.
All eyes were on me. I sat by the nightstand with my grandma's dresser behind me. There was no room for anyone to stand beside or behind me. I asked my grandma, Nitai, go ahead. My grandma opened her eyes. She looked right behind me and then back at me.
Chao, Chai, Jitube Chai, the Kodako Laloboa. The
hair on my body stood on end as a chill ran down my spine. I reminded my grandma that no one is there. She closed her eyes and replied,
Oh,
This has been a norm for my grandma for several days. She will often speak of family members who have passed on, and she will mention people who are not present at the moment. In this stage, I know that her end is nearing. When her time comes, there will be nothing I can do to make her stay. This thought torn me to a million pieces. But I know her spirit, or Nidunjupli, is not with her body any longer. A person is born with 3 spirits, Dunjupli, Dunjudua, Te Dunjulo. Dunjupli, Dunjudua, and Dunjulo is rooted in our Hmong culture and spirituality. Dunjupli, or the spirit of birth, is associated with our physical body and life force. It enters our body at birth and departs upon death. When someone passes away, it's their Jupli that moves on to the next life and reincarnation. After death, Dunjudua, or the guardian spirit, remains connected to the physical body. It watches over the body, which is Dunjulo, ensuring a peaceful transition. Some believe that during this time, the person may perceive spiritual phenomena or communicate with departed loved ones. And this is the stage my grandma is in. Lastly, Dunjulo, this refers to the physical body, or our plain body, left behind after death. It's no longer animated by life force, because Dunjupli already left, but the guardian spirit remains with it until burial or cremation. The experiences my grandmother is having, speaking of departed family members or sensing unseen presence, are consistent with this spiritual framework. This is all a part of the transition from life to death. My grandma's youngest sister, Tainti, stayed over at my uncle's house with us that night. She slept with my grandma in her bed so that Aunt Sheng and I could sleep in the living room. Aunt Sheng offered me the couch, but I declined. Knowing she's exhausted, I wanted her to feel as comfortable as possible. She slept on the couch and I lay on the floor with a thin blanket beneath me. I tossed and turned due to the discomfort from the hardwood floor, eventually falling asleep around 2 a.m. The house was quiet until I heard footsteps coming from the kitchen. The footsteps were approaching my room. I woke up, pretending to be asleep. The steps were accompanied by a thumping sound, like someone using a cane. Curious, I turned to face the kitchen, and that's when I saw a dark figure. To my surprise, it was my frail grandma, even though she could barely stand on her own. Concerned for her safety, I sat up quickly. "Nitai, có yêu một thứ. Ôi cha, có chỉ hai bé ba có chạy ple con thon à?" She didn't respond. Instead, she spun around and darted toward the dining room. I couldn't understand the situation at the moment, so I immediately got up to chase after my grandma. She ran out the back door and I followed her. I stood in shock, finding myself in a different realm. It was daytime, and now I stood in the middle of a dirt road surrounded by a tall grass field. From a distance, I could make out a couple coming toward me. They were holding hand in hand and smiling. Eventually, the couple approached me. I recognized the young lady as my grandma. She was with a young man, probably in his mid-30s. "Nitai, puyo ko na. Có tôi đã chín nó thế, có hỏi một thứ nó."
Mẹ này, yêu của cơ. Cô yêu cho cá mù của lúc chạy tìm lo nữa. Ê, có nhớ chị tao tới chân là nó mà. Có cái chi cho cá mù chạy nữa.
"Nitai, cô chỉ mua yêu có chín thao của cho cá mù nè. Cô chỉ bố có một tìm lo nè, có chỉnh chị tao rong. Yêu thầu tới có rong là cô mà cho có muốn chi ô xí sư. Ê, có cho cá thao của một chạy."
Mẹ này, cô tư yêu tao biết đã lâu rồi. Cô tư yêu tao biết là chè của yêu mua mà. Có giờ tư cho cá lò tò của luôn là thế này chè của anh cho cái giờ mua nè. Có cái chi một chè ó, có nhớ chị tao nó nên té mà.
I held onto my grandma's sleeve, tears streaming down my face. I begged her not to leave, but she insisted. Desperate, I asked her to take me with her. My plan was to go along and then find a way to bring her back home. Suddenly, she pulled away and vanished with the young man, and I stood there, heartbroken. I followed the dirt road and came across strange, isolated villages. I asked the villagers if anyone had seen my grandma, but they didn't know who she was. I cried and cried until I heard Aunt Shang's voice. She woke me up, and it was morning. It was just another dream. Aunt Shang asked what was wrong and why I was crying in my dream. I recounted the dream to her, struggling to find the words through my tears. She comforted me, assuring me it was only a dream and that Grandma was still in her room. I must have been so tired that I did not hear Aunt Shang had already prepared breakfast for my grandma. Knowing my grandma was still here brought immense relief. I got up, ready to start my day, and went to check on her. She sat wearily on her bed. I returned to the living room, lost in thought about my dreams. Tears welled up in my eyes. Normally I don't have such vivid dreams, but lately, as my grandma's health declined, they've become more intense. The young man from my dream, I believe he must be my grandpa. He stood tall and masculine with a sharp chin and deep brown eyes, a very handsome figure. Seeing my grandma so happy with him touched my heart. Growing up, she was the only grandparent I knew. I never had the chance to meet my dad's parents or my mom's dad, the man from my dream. My grandpa passed away suddenly in Laos in 1985, and since then my grandma never remarried. She patiently raised her 5 children as a single mom and brought all of them to America. I have visited my grandma for 5 days, and today was my last day here. My ride will be picking me up at 6 p.m. tonight, and we will be on our way back to Oklahoma. Aunt Shang approached me and said,
Nó mỏ ta nó chế bác cùng bác ta nên ple tàn chi ở cho cá tua. Ê tàn chi ở tua nâng đồ nè tài nó lấy.
I had forgotten about the Oneng ritual. So many shamans have come to perform a ritual for my grandma. All shamans had said the same thing. Her jubilee is sad and has gone to find new parents in the next life. Their words were not promising. During Tang Qi's Oneng ritual, her chanting words became very melodic, and she started to cry in her chants. My grandma's spirit was very sad and wouldn't come back. Her sister, Tang Qi, pleaded Tiangang with all her heart for my grandma's spirit to return to her body. After the Oneng ritual, Tang Qi went to sit by my grandma in her bedroom. Tang Qi cried and said to my grandma, Mình chưa nói, nếu mình nhổn chua bó thổ chứng mình mê ồ, nị cứ yết cứ đờ chuyến cho lô tàu rong. Có một yếu chỉ lâu chuyện cho có ơn chuông dần gió thế. Có nị tu thế mình nhổn lò ít chia chuyện chuyến cho có nhỏ thế ồ. Cô mình nị lòng cho nó cho tu xế ở mà. Giờ một trong mong ấy nữ trong chỗ lò nó chế bế chuyện ở nhỏ xí lúc mùa mà. Giờ chỉ một trong mong ấy nữ chỉ trong lợi nó chế gió trong ở mà. Nên dân trong một phá lự tỉa. Một thọ đánh đó gọi rong cho lo một nhẹ một gì. Thế cháu ơn cho xin trong gọi lì tiền nó lợi ở mà. My grandma sighed and said in a fatigued tone of voice.
Ê, để tay, để chị sáng dậy đây mùa. Chẳng sẽ sáng nhớ, dễ tay mình nhỏ nè. Chẳng sẽ bỏ tay sinh dư, theo lời tay mình nhỏ. Lo sâu cha, gió mò luôn. Ý sổ yun đơn ý nhắn đến bảo cha lợi ọ.
I silently cried while listening to their conversation. My grandma has never cried in front of her children and us, her grandchildren. At that moment, I felt her pain. She must have been so lonely. There were likely many times when she felt sad and afraid, not knowing what to do, yet she had to stand strong for her kids and grandkids. Feeling her pain made me sad, and the tears wouldn't stop coming. Aunt Shang came through the door and told me my friends were waiting outside for me. I couldn't believe the time. Was it already time to go back home? I hadn't spent enough time with my grandma. My grandma glanced at me and asked if I'd eaten yet. I replied yes. My grandma was always afraid we'd be hungry. She made sure we were fed and we never went to bed hungry. She'd been this way ever since my siblings and I were little kids. Our parents were always busy at work, so it was my grandma who watched over us and made sure we were taken care of. Some nights we slept at her house until our parents were ready to pick us up. I climbed onto my grandma's bed and said my goodbyes. I told her I would be coming back in 2 weeks to visit her again. For now, I have to return home and go back to work. Even though I try to stay hopeful, a part of me tells me that she will not be here in 2 weeks when I come back. A couple of days after I got home, I called my grandma. My parents had flown in to see her, and my dad told me that grandma actually sat up to eat, and she's even having pho. She's not eating a lot, but she is eating something now. I spoke with my grandma and she told me that with assistance, she was able to walk outside to look at her garden. My heart felt so happy hearing all the good news. I thought about all my strange dreams and wondered if they were just dreams because I was worried about my grandma, and maybe it's nothing. Little did I know this was the calm before the storm. Sure enough, what I feared most came true. On the morning of Mother's Day, May 12th, I received the devastating news from my uncle that my grandma had passed away at 2 a.m. Devastated by this news, I sat up in bed and immediately called Aunt Shang's Facebook Messenger. As soon as she picked up, I started bawling. Aunt Shane confirmed that my grandma is no longer with us. She said the removal team from the funeral home is here to transport my grandma's body. I asked to see my grandma one last time. My grandma was dressed in her old Hmong clothes, or kunjalao. She lay lifeless and pale on her bed. Family members surrounded her. The staff from the funeral home made their way to my grandma's side, and I watched as they transported her out of the bedroom and out of the house. No matter who tried to wake her up, she didn't move. I wish this were all a dream and that my grandma is still here when I wake up. I bid my grandma a final farewell as she left with the funeral home staff. My grandma passed away just over a week ago, and not a day goes by that I don't miss her. Recently, I returned to her house, and it felt like she was still there. I could almost hear her sweet voice calling my name as I walked through the door. Her smiling face greeted me just as it did in the past. All the signs she gave and the dreams I've been having, I knew her time was coming. Life isn't fair. People say time will heal, but those are just words of comfort. I believe we never truly heal. We simply learn to move on without the people we've lost. It feels selfish to want to hold her back when I know she's suffering and in pain. I'm just not ready to lose her. But I take solace in knowing she's in a better place now, free from pain. It's been over 30 years since Grandpa passed away, and she's finally reunited with him. Grandma, may you fly high in the sky with Grandpa until the day we meet again.